Hello, Crystal Cocoon listeners out there. We got another exciting episode. And today it will be just myself, Brandon Lapierre, and
Jesse Dujari. Hello.
Unfortunately, our other host is sick today, so you just have the two of us. Today on the show, we'll be talking about predictions, timelines, vibrations, vibrational energy. Basically continuing the conversation from last episode and on the multiverse, and more specifically talking about timelines and predictions and what they are, why they don't always work, and how to tune in better with your optimal timeline and the vibrational components of it all. We'll also be talking about how this translates into some of the healing work we do. But first, we have a question from one of our listeners, Vivian Aguilar-Tam, from Dinsmere, California. And she asked, is the only way to activate the pineal gland through vibration?
Yeah, she did ask about that. Now, I personally, my first exposure to activating my pineal gland was doing what my former teacher called the pineal thump. Have you heard of that?
I have not.
It's where you hold your hand on the back of your head and you line up your middle finger. So it's right at the base of your skull. And then you take your other hand and you bring it behind and you lift the finger off of your skull and then let it thump back into place. And as you thump it, it sends vibrations into the center of the brain, and it's supposed to help decalcify the pineal gland. So we were instructed to do that for a week and a few times a day. And that was my first real exposure to that. And then, of course, I was looking up, some information based on her question. And I read some information about using not cholera. Don't use cholera. Please don't use that. Chlorella. Thank you. Wheatgrass and spirulina. God, I can't talk today, Brandon.
That's okay.
I'm all tongue-tied. And that those also support with decalcification of the pineal gland, which is what inhibits and limits it. What about you? What have you heard about that?
Well, spirulina is really good for neural functions and making new neural pathways. When you're learning anything, especially in metaphysical terms, when you're doing more spiritual work and learning that kind of thing, it's really good for helping the brain do that. And I haven't heard of it being used specifically for decalcifying the pineal gland, but it doesn't surprise me that you've heard of that. I have heard of cilantro, which is great for removing heavy metals as well. And I know some people personally that's used it to do some major detoxing, and that's been really effective for them. What was the other thing you said?
The wheatgrass.
Chlorella. Yeah, that's
not cholera.
Yeah. That's a type of algae, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so that doesn't surprise me either, because algae is really good for your body. Like the blue-green algae, that's really great for you. So that doesn't surprise me either, that is used to decalcify the pineal gland. I've heard of other people using some other things, but really it's all about detoxifying and decalcifying. I've never heard of the pineal thump before, but that doesn't surprise me either. The main component I'm seeing there is you're not only the physical vibrations moving through, causing enough of a jar to kind of loosen things up, but it's your intention focused specifically on the pineal for decalcifying. So just like when you're doing energy work, and you're focusing on a particular intent, the combination of that physical action and the intent, I think, would be very effective. So what was your experience out of that week of doing the P thumps?
Well, it's really hard to say, because I was pretty blowing open pretty widely at that point already. I was already experiencing a lot of changes, and I would say that it supported that, it definitely, but I felt, I was already feeling from one week to the next an expansion in my consciousness and awareness and ability to process that. So there wasn't a marked difference, really. other than that, I was already on that accelerated bandwagon. And I noticed with some of the other students, the ones who did it did seem to increase more than they had been before. Another thing I found out while I was doing research on this was a thing called tongue yoga. Have you heard of this?
Tongue yoga.
Yeah.
No, but I did learn at Ripley's Believe It or Not this weekend that only 4 out of 5 people, or 1 out of 5 people, can actually roll their tongue.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I can roll my tongue.
Me too.
So, tongue yoga is this process. I read 2 different things about it. One yogi said that you fold your tongue. So you're folding it, like reaching to the back of your throat with your tongue and folding it back on itself. And he said, just hold it in that position as often as you can. He was like, do it when you're running, when you're riding a bike, because it creates a pressure at the top of the head, the roof of the mouth, which is right below the pineal gland in the back of the mouth. And that helps to open it. Then he said, another yogi, though, said, when he was talking about tongue yoga specifically, and there was a name, I forget the name of it, I'll post it when I post stuff for this episode, but he said, stroke the back of your throat with your tongue. And every day do this until you can really reach far back there, and you can feel that soft cavity behind the roof of the mouth. You're feeling it.
Yep.
And as you stroke that with your tongue, it will release your DMT and your pineal fluids more. And so I was playing around with both of those over the last couple of days. And it's interesting. I have definitely increased my reach of my tongue. I can reach much further back. And it is it enhanced my meditation when I did that while I was meditating, especially right before the meditation.
Yeah, it's interesting. As a kid, I remember I would always scratch my throat with my tongue back there in that soft spot.
I was always fascinated with that soft spot too as a kid.
Yeah.
So when he mentioned it, I was like, oh, far out. Yeah. So
Interesting.
those are the things that we found out about the pineal activation, and of course in the discussion page we would love, or on the Facebook page, we'd love to hear other people's contributions of anything they've heard about as well for pineal activation and pineal decalcification and detoxification.
Well, the other thing is like you're talking specifically about the pineal gland, so
Right.
activating the pineal gland, and most commonly it's referred to as the third eye opening,
Right.
but they're really interchangeable. So doing the physical component, the detox of the pineal, because there are lots of toxins in our environment that build up like a crust on it and inhibits it from it being its full potential. It's important to do the physical part too. But the question around is it vibration? Is the only way through vibration? The way I think about that is what isn't vibration?
Right.
So there really is everything in existence, everything in reality has a vibration. So the more direct answer to that, I would say no. So because everything is vibration, whether you're doing a thump, whether you're doing a detox, you're increasing the vibration. Everything has a vibration. The other thing too is if you're thinking about more in terms of is the only way through energy work, then there's other ways to do it other than like energy transmissions and things like that. One way particularly is through breath work. You ever heard of using breath work?
Not for the pineal gland, no, but I do use breath work a lot for different meditation states, creating different states in meditation and work.
There's a really fantastic, and it's like a mystery school method of pineal gland activation. So yeah, don't go spending the thousands of dollars. I'll give you the free one right here.
Oh no, they will come after us. Who are those magicians who were busting all of the magic schools? Remember, they got in a lot of trouble.
Oh, Penn and
was that Penn and Tell?
Penn and Teller.
I can't remember.
Yeah, anyway.
They got busted.
So yeah, through breath work. So there's a way that you can restrict the access by closing off your throat with your tongue, and then when you're doing that, there's you're going to really force your breath up and down, but through a restriction, and it's going to cause the oxygen in your brain to be restricted, and it activates other areas. So when you're doing that, you're going to close your eyes and start to meditate, and then focus in on the pineal, focus in on that third eye. And when you do that, you're going to slowly increase the rate of your breath a little bit, from a really slow start, and then increase a little bit. And then there's going to be a point that it almost pops. And the feeling I had when I did it is that it's almost like your body disappears and the energy just fills up the room, and all these fantastic colors burst out. And
holy crow!
Yeah, it was really intense and really amazing. So I actually did it with my old roommate. We were sitting there, and then let's try this, and both of us were equally amazed.
Wow.
So yeah, there is other ways to do it. That was one, and for a little bit more specifics on the process, I can't remember where I found it at the time right now, but when I do, I'll let you guys know.
Very cool.
But that's another way of doing it.
Something else that popped into my head, so I'm just going to say it. A couple of the things that were listed here were algae under nutritional shifts that you can make to help you detoxify. And it reminded me of something, and I'm going to bring it up because our producer, Eric, he's very interested in Hebrew culture. And does other podcasts and work around that. And so it was the concept of how the Israelites, when they left Egypt, they survived on manna from heaven, right? They say that they survived on manna from heaven. Well, there was this documentary I watched, and they were talking about how they found that it actually was an algae. This algae that was a space algae, basically. And now astronauts use that. They grow that algae, and they're, experimenting with all these different ways because it's a complete food. It's a whole food, and it keeps the system pure and helps the system process through radiation and all these different exposures.
What is that algae?
They call it manna. But it was so fascinating, and I was like, oh,
what do the
interesting.
astronauts call it?
I can't remember what they call it, but I'm going to look that up because that really, I'm going to pick Eric's brain about it too.
Oh, a complete food.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Well, and it was like they would deliver it in, at least what the astronauts are eating are these like green kind of like, the nori chips and things like that. It kind of looks a lot like that.
I imagine. Yeah.
Very dark green and but it's in a brick. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In this little brick format.
Probably tasty.
Right. Like grass. Yeah. But it's interesting because, when we think about nutrition and we think about food, and, we've been doing a lot of research about that lately. And, we have this idea because of this food pyramid that we've been given, that doesn't put the weight in on the true substances we should be consuming, really, and then what we need is just so much more of this green stuff, and we just don't eat it. We don't eat enough of it because it doesn't taste sweet, and it doesn't taste yummy, and it doesn't make us feel good, or we think it doesn't.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. We can make it taste good, but as far as a food pyramid goes, like, who made that?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. You always got to look at like the politics behind any of the things that you hear about in science and health and
medicine.
Yeah, politics and the economics behind something.
Yeah, so let's just put it at the greener, the funkier tasting.
Probably the better.
Probably the better for you if you're in the process of trying to awaken your pineal glands. But the other point I wanted to bring into this also is the pineal is just one gland. Yes, it's a master gland in our system of our endocrine system, but it is one. And so if you want to have a healthy functioning master gland, you really need to address all of your endocrine system as well, I think.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. Well, that was that's our answers to Vivian. Thank you so much for posing the question, Vivian.
Yeah, thank you, Vivian.
And we were going to move on to continue talking about predictions and timelines, and like what it means. I know I talk with my clients and friends a lot about there's no such thing as time, and they're like, whatever, Jesse, you said that 5 seconds ago. But when you really start to embrace the concept that our experience is time, that what we're kind of creating it as we go for ourselves, it changes the way you approach your life. And I think that that's one of the things for myself that's really been a huge shift in the way I approach all the rest of my life, is understanding that right now is just right now. And I can't go back and change yesterday, but it's all relative to where I'm going for tomorrow. And I can't focus on tomorrow because today is where I can affect it and change it. And I think we get really lost in time because we have so much anxiety and so much dissociation. So we have all these people that are lost in their pasts of their trauma and their hurt. And then we have all these people who are like fixated on the future, where they don't have to feel what they're feeling right now. They can avoid it. And so we already exist in a culture where time doesn't exist, which I think is interesting, personally.
I wouldn't say time doesn't exist in our culture necessarily,
No.
but because they're so focused on time,
Right.
whether it be the past or the future, but they're not focused on the now. But the relevance that time doesn't exist, it's more about everything existing in the now.
Mm-hmm.
So if everything is springing from the now, then it doesn't make any sense to focus on the past or the future, because you have to focus on all the actions now that realign your timeline to where you want to be. Mm-hmm. Going forth for a reminder for everybody from the multidimensional concepts that we were covering before, there is a certain dimensionality that you get to. I think I remember, is it the fifth? I think it's the fifth dimension, where all the timelines are, and then the sixth dimension is where they converge into one.
Yeah.
And then they all exist simultaneously in that sixth dimension. So that's really the concept of why time doesn't exist, because they all converge. And when you think about it, them being simultaneous timelines in existence, that's what it's really saying, is this like time itself is less of a happenstance and more of a coordinate system. So it's a coordinate for your existence. It's a coordinate for where you are currently focusing in your reality. And that's also part of what I see is in the future, when they figure out time travel and teleportation, at least publicly, it will be along the lines of changing the vibrational aspect of something to match where it's going, whether it be through time or through space.
Well, and that's a lot like what Bashar says.
Right.
You know, he talks about how as we proceed through our lives, we're we're basically shifting from one pane of expression, pain being like a window pane, one pane of expression to the next. And we're doing this on a, very, very microscopic scale, or I don't know, microsecond scale. And as we are shifting, we're choosing the vibrational expression that is that pane of expression, that window pane, and it is a coordinate system. And so, according to him, that's how we can shift our reality, is by understanding that, and then shifting the vibrational aspect to where we want it to be. Which I love that.
Yeah, I've heard two different things lately that just reinforce the idea that if you change the vibration of yourself to match the vibration of where you're trying to get to, that's the foundations for consciousness-based teleportation. And I also personally had an experience where I was out of my body one time, and I remember at first, I would feel this vibration coming from the center of my chest, and then that would flash throughout my body, and I would go from room to room. And I was looking, I don't know what I was doing, but I was looking for a room that I liked. And then I was like, oh, no, I don't like this room. Oh, no, I don't like this room. And finally, it's very artsy, bright colors on the walls. It was very beautiful looking. And I was like, oh, I like this room, but I could change a few things. And I didn't like some of the paintings on the wall. So the vibration was what helped me flash from place to place. And it was really like we were talking about, matching the vibrational component of the next place. But then when I waved my hand over everything changed underneath my hand, and it was the vibration from my hand shooting up my arm as I passed it over a painting that changed the painting underneath. So it was again changing my frequency to the frequency of the reality that I really wanted to experience at the time. And
And this was in the out-of-body experience.
Yeah, this was in the astral realm. It wasn't in the physical. It wasn't. Yeah, still working on that.
We'll get there eventually. But it does take a lot of practice, because you have to be able to hone your focus and your intention, and hold that, because there's a lot of things that want to pull you off from that. And as you do any kind of astral projection work or trying to shift timeline and reality work, it's like walking a little bit through molasses. And if you don't stay focused on your path, you can get lost in the steps that you're doing.
Yeah, our modern world has so many limitations built into it that we have to work against. Not only are you working against the collective consciousness that everybody has agreed to, that how this reality works, but then you're also working against all the thoughts and beliefs that you've learned along the way. And the other problem, especially in our modern world, is that we lack the ability to focus.
Right.
So without the focus, you can't really put all of your attention and energy into the change that you really want to see, because that's what it really takes. It's a complete focus of all that you are into that space.
Yeah. I remember when my son was littler, we were doing a lot of, I was doing a lot of research on trying to understand brain development. And one of the things that I really hit upon was, lack of impulse control, lack of compassion, and lack of ability to focus are really the three root causes of most of the strife in our society at this point. And so I was like, okay, well, what do I have to do? And one of the things that I had researched was talking about how, television, children's programming, how with children's television programming, the imagery flashes, the scene changes, the bright light flashing changes, they happen on a much more rapid scale. So they happen something like 16 to 64 times per minute, where with adult programming, it's a much less frequency. It's like 6 to 8 times per minute, because it's uncomfortable for us. And that's a reason that it's uncomfortable for a lot of adults to watch children's programming. And what happens with each of those scene changes is it causes the brain, it's like a stimulant to the brain, and refocuses the attention. And it trains the brain that it needs that refocus that often in order to stay focused on something. And so that's why kids who do watch a lot of TV before they're 3 and 4, when you set them in front of, like, let's say a bunch of blocks, they're like 2 seconds later, they're done. They're bored with it. They don't have that. They don't have that long processing of that's created by forcing re-engagement without the stimulation, the intense stimulation of television and sound, the light and sound. And so they were talking about for kids that watch TV like 1 hour per day, they're 10% more likely to develop ADHD. And that's what we're seeing is rampant amongst our children in this current generation coming up. So it is important to allow yourself, give yourself time to have singular focus, singular practice, singular attention, and it not be at the television.
Makes me think about how the correlation might be to video game addiction, because
it's again a stimulant,
right? And it keeps up with that same trend of all the flashing movements,
right. Well, and there's a big difference between kids who get sucked into playing Tetris and kids who get sucked into playing like Grand Theft Auto.
Right.
I mean, there's a big difference in the brain processing, and it's not to say that it's bad. I mean, there's a lot of studies also that show that kids who play a lot of video games have a much quicker response time, think more quickly, have more analytical abilities. So there is a slight difference in the video game versus the television, because at least you're engaged. You're actively engaged. You're controlling the reality in a sense while you're having that play. Whereas with the television, you're really just a drone. You're just sitting there. You're numbed out.
Yeah, that's true. There is more engagement. It's still like people who play heavy video games are losing other areas of the brain.
I agree. Yeah. It's balance.
Yeah.
It's all about balance. Mm-hmm. But one of the things so we talk a lot about like in our healing work, and I think we'd mentioned this before, the concept of finding an expression in time or in a timeline or in a reality dimensional expression, multi-parallel expression, where it's more optimum for you. So I thought we could talk about that a little bit too. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know for myself, there's been occasions, I recognize when it has to do with a potential coming up. And it's like something feels off. I don't know what it is. I feel like something bad is coming. And so when I feel that, I'm like, okay, where am I out of alignment? And I tune into myself. And then, streaming through it usually takes me to like, oh, something is going to occur. I'm like, okay, sometimes I'll check in and who or what it is. And sometimes it's like...
And you're looking towards the future, right? You're looking to see what's coming that's making me feel this way.
Right. It's the highest probable outcome. And I don't really get any more specific than that. Sometimes, we've talked about this, I think, in another show, but sometimes it's better not to know.
Yeah.
Not to know the specifics of it. For the same reason that we can go back to the particle slit experiment.
Right.
Where once you observe the outcome, then it's more set in stone.
Right.
So that's more for like a physical reality outcome than it is for an intuitive one. But you also don't want to spin and sit on your intuitive senses either when you're getting an impulse that something may occur. So for me, I don't even bother going into it because I don't really need to.
Yeah.
But feeling the potential of whatever's coming, and then what I see is like different dots of timelines of like the three most probable, and then I go into working how to balance those. And once I bring those into balance, and then I bring myself into a balance with those spaces, then I am no longer in alignment with that potential catastrophe that was occurring before. Yeah.
I know for myself, my first real experience with time and being able to see along the timelines, was while I was training, and my first real vision that came to me from another time was of me mourning for my husband passing. And it was really, really upsetting. It was really upsetting to me. And I contacted my teacher, and she was like, yeah, I think you should start preparing. I think that you need to start preparing for that. And I was like, oh man, I so don't want to prepare for that. How do you prepare for that? What do you do? And the visions kept getting stronger and stronger. And at the same time, my husband, he had a traumatic brain injury. And so he has some, various problems as a result of that. And he was starting to have more and more seizures. They were happening more frequently. And he just wasn't himself, a lot of the time. And his behavior was getting more escalated. And that's really common with brain trauma stuff. So it was really a very scary period for me. And so I kept seeing this mourning him, and it was like the Christmas decorations were still up, but like there were blossoms on the trees outside. So I had an idea that it was going to happen sometime shortly after Christmas, and I was really like, oh, I don't want this to be my reality. Like, I so don't want this to be the reality. And so I started looking like, what can I do? How is there a possibility of a time where, this doesn't happen? And I was just hitting this wall, and not being able to see beyond it. And that sent me on this whole, crazy search along all these other possible timelines. Well, if he does pass, what about this? And if he does, what about this? And it was this way of distracting myself really from dealing with preparing, And so I finally realized I was driving myself crazy doing that. And I had to just stop and deal with what was right in front of me, right now. And then I was tuning in, and I ended up doing some energy work with him that was some of the most powerful I've ever done. Then I think I did like three sessions with him, and then my teacher did one session, and then the seizures stopped, and the visions stopped. So was I actually seeing what was going to happen? I don't know. Was it a warning that was letting me know, no, you've got to do this now if you don't want this to happen? I'm not sure. But I do strongly feel since we did that work, it's shifted our timeline. It shifted us to a different place. It changed our marriage. It changed everything about how we related to each other. So, I think when we get these visions of the future and these predictions, yeah, we have to take them seriously, but we also have to recognize that they could also, in and of themselves, just be a message.
I think that if you're getting it that strong, it is likely the future. It is the most likely outcome at the time. but it's also the most likely outcome at the time, given your vibration before you do anything about it.
Oh, yeah.
So, and it could be for the positive or the negative, and it could either add or take away. So, this is why, like, as far as predictions are concerned, sometimes it's better not to know. So if you're getting the information, yes, you're going to be successful. It's inevitable. Your business is going to take off. You're going to do really well. And the person who was then doing all the actions that would to get there suddenly stopped because, well, it's inevitable. I don't have to try so hard. I just have to let it happen, and
right.
Everything's in my favor. And then suddenly they don't put themselves out there in the way they were before, and the business doesn't take off.
Yeah.
And then they get another reading. Well, it's something shifted. It's da-da-da-da. So it can be the detriment because knowing then that it was supposed to be inevitable, quote unquote, their vibration changed from doing action to non-action. I remember as far as like actually seeing the timeline and seeing like an outcome and changing it. I've had two different occurrences in my life where I can think of that there was a significant shift. One, I had a dream. So much like yours, I had this dream. It was very vivid. At the time, I was habitually late for work, and so I was getting up, and I would get in my car, and I was in San Diego, so you can drive faster. But I would drive 90, 95 miles an hour to work every day.
We do not endorse this as a practice at home.
I don't recommend this. Unless you're living in Southern California.
I feel that way so many times when I hear these old stories of Brandon's.
So anyway, don't judge me.
I'm not. I don't know what you're talking about.
So I was going and going pretty fast to work, and I was as this string of like, oh man, I got up late again, and then I would rush off. And then I had this dream where I was doing that, and I was zipping around traffic, and what looked like it should have been a pretty straight deal, zipping around another car and then moving forward. But when I did, I moved around this car and then switched over to the left, and I was going to gun it. But then the car in front of me, when I switched over to the left, slammed on his brakes because somebody in front of them slammed on their brakes. And then I remember even seeing this car and the license plate. I saw the license plate. There was this black Honda. I saw the license plate. I could read it. I'm like, oh, that's weird. I could read this. But then it slammed on the brakes, and then I saw the engine come into my face, basically. So
my God.
The whole thing crumpled up, and I was crushed. And I knew I would have died. That was a death right there.
Yeah, and this was in your dream.
This
right?
was in a dream,
okay.
But I woke up, and because usually you can't read things in your dream, so that was significant. And then the other thing is I already knew that was a fini.
Yeah.
And so fast forward 2 weeks later, and I also would have a guide wake me up from time to time around that time, very frequently, and I could hear her audibly. When she would say my name, I think it was just getting me used to hearing clairaudiently. So you're like, man, how often were you late? No.
I'm like, the guides are all, dude, wake up.
Hey.
Brandon, wake up. Oh, that's awesome.
So I got the warning 2 weeks later, or 2 weeks earlier, and then 2 weeks later, I heard this very beautiful, soft voice. It was Brandon, Brandon, and I was like, I'm tired, still sleeping. And I looked at the clock, and I read it wrong when I looked at it. I'm like, oh, I have time, and I rolled back over to go to sleep, and then I felt a physical finger in my rib, a sharp poke, and I was like, oh, I'm up, and I looked around. Wait a minute. There's no one here. Okay. Well, thank you. So I looked at the clock. I was like, oh, crap, I'm late. And so I got ready real quick and then hurried out the door. And then I had this strange feeling. And so I got in the car and I was driving and I was like, I know I need to hurry, but I shouldn't hurry that much. And so I drove.
Yeah, no 95, please.
No. I drove reasonable. It was like 85.
So glad I'm not your mother.
So I was driving and I saw it. I saw the same black Honda in my dream. And then instead of swerving over to the left and trying to get ahead, I just kind of stayed, and then I moved over to the right, and I saw that whole scenario play out where it scooted over, swerved at the same time I would have done because that's what happened. We were both concurrently moving over to the same lane, and then the other one slammed on its brakes. And so I saw it go over, and that whole lane slowed down, and that would have been the crash. But then I just continued on to work, and I was like, okay, yeah, I need to really wake up earlier.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. All right.
Yeah, totally.
So that was one experience that I saw a potential timeline, and it was shifted.
Yeah.
Another experience I had, it was much later. It was actually maybe a year ago or a year and a half ago. I was laying in my bed and I was supposed to meet my mom at a friend's house, and we're having a get together, a potluck dinner, and all of a sudden I could see vivid. I started crying. I started getting emotional. I could see vividly the funeral. And I saw. I could hear all the people coming and crying, and I was playing over in my head and like what I could have done differently. It was like my body and my emotions were seeing everything as it already happened. And then I got there, and then I didn't really say anything at first, but I still felt it. And then when we were going to leave, I followed her out, and I was like, I knew she would get it, and I said, "It's not time yet for you. Don't leave yet." And then she understood, and we both started crying. And I'm like, "You need to be careful on your way home. There's something, I don't know what it is, but you need to be careful on the way home. And it's not time yet. There's an option for you to go now, but it's not time yet." And then so she was already really tired. She was overtired, and then she's night blind as well, and she's got these things that we're going on with her. Challenges. So she was a little foggy headed, and she was driving home, and she said she was more alert on purpose, and then she saw it when this guy, she wasn't paying attention, but she saw him before he came because she was extra alert, and he ran a red light and ran right in front of her, but he would have plowed right into her from the side, right where their driver's door was. So that was another instance that it shifted because I was paying attention.
Yeah. Growing up, my mom would talk about, she was always predicting something. Usually she was right. She knew when there was going to be an earthquake, or, she would always know when there was going to be an earthquake or something like that. And she would end up spending the whole day in bed, and she'd be like, "Oh, I feel horrible. Okay, you guys, there's probably going to be an earthquake or something the next day." My brother and I'd be like, "You're crazy," like every time. And then there would be, and we're like, "Oh man." And it would be earthquakes in other parts of the, where we have family that would live, So like, the earthquake in San Francisco that was in 90s. Was that in the 90s or the 80s? I can't remember now.
I don't remember.
Anyway, I was little then, and the spans were collapsing, and she totally was, predicted that a day or two beforehand, and so I would go out at night as a teenager. She would always be like, "Jesse, I have a really bad feeling. I don't think you should go out." I'm like, "Quit using that. You're always using that as an excuse."
I was just going to say, she's so used to that.
I know. But I never knew what to believe or not, because sometimes it was true, it was right. And so that was always very rough. But she was it was interesting. Time has always been something that's been fascinating to me, and understanding it. And I've always, read tarot cards since I was really little. And so I had the concept that I could look into my future. And my tarot readings were always, for the most part, pretty right on, unless I did something to shift or change it. And that was really my first experience with changing timelines. Like I'd do a reading and I'd be like, "Whoa, that looks terrible. Okay, what if I think about it like this and then do another reading? And then I'd get a much different outcome. And so I kind of started now looking back on that was my, early timeline work. Now when I'm doing readings, I'm actually doing energy work on the readings as I do them to shift that time and to shift the energy moving forward and applying that towards the timeline that we're on, which is fascinating to me because it feels really natural. But when I start to try to think about how would I explain it, how would I discuss it with somebody, then it's like, oh, I sound like I'm crazy. Or at least I feel like I sound like I'm crazy.
Well, most people don't have any concept that there's any other thing other than what they're experiencing going on.
Right.
Even when they have these anomalies that happen in their life, even when they have that, not everybody has that, but even when they do, most people have no concept outside of what they're experiencing. Mm-hmm. So how is it that different things can appear and disappear within your in front of you? Like myself having the wall be there in the hotel that wasn't normally there and then disappear. Mm-hmm. So there's two different realities going on. So just like there's two different realities going on, there's also different timelines within the same quote unquote reality. Mm-hmm. And why not have them be able to shift and jump? Because if everything's energy, then yourself as a consciousness is going to want to experience all that it can. It's kind of like when you think in your human body, oh, I wish I didn't miss out on that. Oh, I wish I would have did that. Oh, I would have what it would have been in like. Your soul's doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. Your soul's doing precisely the same thing, and because of the lack of limitations and restrictions on the true nature of reality, your soul does just that. It plays these scenarios out and whatever it wants to experience. So, and then we would talk about getting into more like the higher dimensional physics of things. Mm-hmm.
Like up into the sixth, where you're looking at the singularity of time.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. Where everything's all happening simultaneously. That's exactly what your soul is doing. Like, what happens when I do this? Mm-hmm. And it plays it out in these different experiences. We're just here having this linear, more or less, experience because that's the way our brain functions. That's the way we separate events from one to another so that we can understand them. Mm-hmm. We understand much more than we used to, but it makes more sense when you look at it from the physics perspective.
Well, and they say a lot of the stuff I read about, the shifts that we're going through energetically right now and switching into the 5D, and we hear a lot of people saying going 5D, that's really what just like how now we have the perspective in the 4D of the three-dimensional, and we can manipulate it and understand it and control it, and we have this tangible way of feeling the three-dimensional aspect of nature. As we shift into the 5D, we're going to have that same level of understanding and awareness and ability to look at time as this new dimension, which is one of the things that I've been hearing about. Have you heard much about that?
Yeah, there is a difference though in when we say 5D and then fifth dimension though. Ah. Yeah, so there's like the fifth density.
Oh, right.
And then there's the dimensional aspect.
Right.
Are we actually changing out of a 3D construct into a 5D construct where we no longer exist in the same type of way that we are physically? Some might say yes, but I think that's a little bit of a misnomer in understanding because when we're here in our experience, you still see UFOs.
Right.
There's still these abduction experiences. There's still
they're still translating into our density.
They're still translating into our density. There is a shift and a change in the vibrational component from where they are to where we are. But we can look at this as the separation in the bubble universe between one reality and the next. So sometimes it's a dimensional difference. Sometimes it's a reality difference, and each of those has its own vibrational component. Mm-hmm. So there's a difference between 5D and fifth density. And then I think even Bashar talks about the density component, where we're actually changing our physical vibration to be a less dense vehicle,
right.
But we're still going to operate and function in the third dimension, just like we are truly operating and functioning in all dimensions. So when we say shifting into a fifth density, what we're really saying is that our awareness is going to be such that we have more access to those higher dimensions as well as our third dimension reality.
Yeah. So when you're doing healing work on somebody, at what point do you start looking on their timeline? What draws you as a healer to incorporate this concept of time into your healing work with somebody?
Usually when they have some sort of talk about what they want in the future. If it's the talk about the past, when they're stuck in the past, usually it's releasing trauma, releasing the ideas of where they're stuck at. If they're talking about the future, something they want, and they seem to be more secular in their thinking, then I'll say, well, let's readjust this where you're at. And sometimes even that, it's more like doing core work to figure out why they're cycling. But if it feels like they're trying to achieve something and there's little obstacles here and there in their way, then I will kind of readjust them into an optimal probability. And so if they're asking about what do you see with this, especially like if they're asking for psychic advice or a psychic interpretation of where they're at in their timelines, then I'll do it as well. So I'm like, well, it looks like the highest probability is this. It looks like this. It looks like you might have a bump here. Do you want to shift that? Okay, let's move that out of the way and adjust it like this. Okay, so if we also address this within you, there'll be less likely of it occurring at a different place in another timeline. So that's when you address multiple aspects within their core of why it would occur in the first place, and then with the timeline itself and the probable outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a lot of clients asking me for future predictions and, asking me like, should I move here? Should I do this? Should I buy this thing? Should I, what's going to happen? And I remember, when I was first really starting to understand this is what the information that was coming to me, I had, one of my teachers had asked me, can you give me some advice on moving? Because for whatever reason, it seems like whatever you're saying is right on. I was like, okay, well, I'm just telling you if I get yeses or nos to this stuff, like you asked me a question and I get a yes or a no in my head. And that's all I'm saying. And so she was like, okay, so we went through and she was planning a big move and she had asked me, am I going to take my pets with me on this international move? And I said, well, I'm getting a no. She goes, well, how could that be? How could that be? She got really upset about it. And the very next day she found out she took her cat in for an examination to see if it was fit to travel. And it was diagnosed with feline leukemia and had to be put down pretty shortly after that. And she was like, okay, all right. So you're not telling me my dog's dying. I'm like, no, I didn't know your cat was dying. Like, and so then it was, and then it was everything about the move.
Don't shoot the messenger.
Right, exactly. Every step of the move though was asking me questions, what about this move and what about that? And I'm going to shift this. And suddenly before I knew it, I found myself sucked into, here I am planning your future with you by looking through your future. And it's like, wait a minute, this is cheating. This is not the way that we work. And I had to kind of like, pull back a little bit from that. And so I'm really careful when with working with clients about doing any kind of future forecasting or even letting them know I see very much of that. Yep. I instead try to work with them seeing their own future.
Right. That's what I was just going to say. Whenever they head down that road, that's what I do. I'm like, well, let's work on you getting there yourself. Like,
right.
What do you see? What do you feel is the most likely outcome?
Yeah, because as I have found, maybe a large percentage of what I predicted came true, but a way bigger percentage didn't because a lot of things are involved in making that future happen, making that potential future. But as you had said earlier, because I was getting that message so strong about my husband, it was like, oh, okay, well, this is an alignment of many futures. This is like a big thing that I'm going to have to figure out. I want to call it a node point in my timeline of,
Yep.
shifting and changing. And this is a decision time. What are you really going to do? Are you really going to step into this role? Are you really going to accept that you can do this and make these kinds of changes energetically for another person? There's a lot of truth finding that was in that. But yeah, the future was wide open after that.
Yeah, you said an interesting thing that I want to note is the node points.
Uh-huh.
So there's often, what I find, at least, I think you mentioned it before too. Well, you just did, but but there's always these major points in everybody's life, when we call them nodes, that the timelines seem to cross over.
Yeah.
So whether a death, a shift, a move, but then you have all these other
Potentials.
minor potentials that
Yeah.
shift here and there, like whether I had black coffee or I had a mocha or whether I had a latte. It's like,
Don't talk about those. I'm 2 days out of sugar, man.
oh, I'm sorry.
Shut up.
Whether I had a green smoothie or a non-green smoothie. Better?
No. No, it's not better.
Oh.
That's okay, though. I'll forgive you. I really miss sugar, by the way. I'm sorry. I just had to put that out there.
Well, the cravings will end.
Oh,
eventually.
goodness. Anyway, yes. The node points, though.
Node
There
points.
are all these potentials that could happen, but then there are these big, major, intersecting points that they're unavoidable. Of course, how we view them, how we process them, how we approach them, and how we exit them, that's changeable.
Yeah, I remember I told you this story one time. I had two people call me. It was when I was moving, and there was a huge, huge storm that night. It was an electrical storm. And I thought it was fantastic because I love lightning and thunder. Yeah, and so I was watching it as I was moving, and singing in my car, like doing my native chants, and I was singing really loud, and then like feeling myself being at one with the sky and the thunder, and really feeling it move my body. And then I felt there was something different about that night, and something powerful. I also saw myself potentially getting in the car crash, because here we go again.
Seriously, I'm so not riding with you.
Well, I don't drive that fast anymore, and this was a little different. It's like I was trying to limit my trips back and forth because I didn't have a moving van or anything. I just had my car. So I packed as much stuff as I could possibly fit in it, to the point where I couldn't see out my right side or my back or my rear view window.
You blinded yourself.
I blinded myself. Oh, yeah, I kind of packed myself into my little driver's seat.
Give yourself some tunnel vision.
Right. And then so all I really had was, and I don't recommend this either, but all I really had was my little rear view mirror on my passenger or my driver's side door. And so I was driving, and I was like, I knew, I was like, I need to stay over to the right. I feel like I'm going to get in a crash if I drive over on the left, because I won't be able to see, and we'll try and get over. And at some point I'm going to need to turn off. So I'm just going to stay all right-hand lane. Mm-hmm. And I did, and I was fine. I was like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to pack it that high next time. But I had two people call me the next day, or that night even. The two people text me and call me, and they were wigging out because they had felt that I died.
Oh.
Two different people. Yeah.
That's never a good thing.
No, well,
I mean, it's good that you can answer that call.
Well, I think it, like we were talking about, like alternate time streams, node points, different versions of reality where yourself exists. Mm-hmm. I think at some point there was that. Yeah. So, I mean, for them to feel it that strongly, for me to be gone, that something happened that night. So whether I died on an alternate time stream or something else, I became a walk-in. I don't know.
Well, that also brings into another point, like, the idea of other time streams, and that's another instance where I bring time into the healings, into my healing session, is when I'm noticing that somebody has a really strong connection to something that has no relevance to their current life. but they didn't experience it in this life. But let's say they have a really strong. For instance, I was working with this one woman, and she was like, "Oh my God, every boyfriend I have, he just cheats on me, and that's so horrible." And she was really like upset about it, and so we started looking, and it was like she had these echoing timelines of these tragic romances, and they always ended really badly for her, usually in her death. So we had to kind of work on those timelines, those expressions. And I talked to her, a few weeks after we had done the work, and she was like, "Oh my God, my whole relationship changed. My whole relationship changed." I'm like, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "Well, I'm still with him. He wasn't actually cheating. He was about to." And he was like, he didn't understand why. And he felt distance from me, and I felt distance from him. And she's like, "And it's not even there anymore. It's not even a part of the relationship." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Interesting. Well, that's great." And so like, to me, that's another time where I'll bring in timelines, is when I'm looking at those kind of parallel expressions, or how, because we do, like you said, other people were impacted by your death on possibly another timeline. And I think that's very true. There's other instances where there's children who will suddenly start becoming obsessed with their own death and thinking that they're dying. And when they've had past life regressions, they did die as children at that age, and they get past the age and they start to shift, and they get beyond the incident where they die in the other expression, and it loses interest to them, and it's no longer a part of what's going on for them. I was reading about a guy who did that, who had that in his childhood, and then as an adult, he went back and did past life regression, and he had died as a child in another life. So we do carry some things too from other expressions, right. Especially if we start thinking of it's all happening right now.
Right.
It didn't happen 1,000 years ago or 100 years ago or in another dimension. It's happening right now.
Yeah, it's happening now.
It's all happening right now. Exactly. And in the future. So then, yes, they do impact us. And so when we would do, like I work with some of my clients on, kind of trying to prepare their future. How do you plan out the future and prepare towards the future? Because there is a certain amount of preparation that you do want to do. And so we talk a lot about it in those respects too. And not about trying to create an idea like, I want to live in this house on this day, but the feeling that you'll get when you're living in that house. We learned about this in class too, like about, it's not about, for manifestation, it's not about, I want to be wealthy, but instead focus on the feeling of security of knowing I have enough for everything I need to provide for the lifestyle that I want, to live unlimited by funds. And so focus on that feeling of living that way instead of focusing on, I want this much money.
Also important for manifestation and timelines and so forth is that when you are trying to manifest something, rather than saying it needs to happen by this time, like ask yourself every day, like, you can set goals for yourself. Ideally, within this much time, I want to be living here or doing this thing. But oftentimes people will set these goals for themselves, and sometimes when they don't make it, they get discouraged. So rather than do that, what I personally like to do is say, okay, ideally I would like to be somewhere else. But rather than focus on that, I focus on, like you said, the feeling. And then every day check in and ask myself, am I moving towards my goal today? Or what can I do to move towards my goal? And so more of like a generalistic goal than like a specific outcome for like, I need to be here in a month or there in a month. Sometimes, those deadlines are important, of course. Like I need to make rent. Yeah. And then for that, it's a different kind of focus. Well, it's actually the same kind of focus, really, more intensive.
Yeah. Well, and then again, it would be the focus of, I want to have safe and secure housing, being secure and comfortable, and know that my housing is safe and healthy and there, and I don't have to stress about my housing. Yeah. I did some, some of the research I was doing in prep for the show today. I was listening to the Psychic Twins. All right. And it was interesting because what I did was I listened to their predictions for 2015. And one of the things that they predicted, and I love this, was they called the 2015 the year of empowerment. They said that it would be the year to start small businesses, to step into your power, to step into who you are. They said it would also be a year where all the minorities, people who have been put asunder, like the racial minorities, women, homosexual groups, this would be the year where they start finding their voice. And I found that as I looked through the year, that's very, very true. That did seem to happen, at least for a lot of people.
Yeah.
It was very much an empowering year. But then they went into, after they kind of went through this whole positive thing, they went into this really negative thing where they're like, terrorism, and be careful of terrorism. There's terrorism here and terrorism there. And all you naysayers. And I was just like, whoa, now I'm really scared. And I'm like tuning in. And they mentioned Oregon several times as far as terrorist plots. I'm like, there were no terrorist plots. But then they said school shootings, mass shootings in Oregon. And I was like, oh, that just happened too, actually.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. And they talked a lot about how, shifting your reality. They said, we're just giving you these warnings because we want you to know that if you start shifting the energy of your home, your place, then maybe you can change this from happening. And that's another thing. A lot of psychics have that out too. So like if you're paying somebody to predict your future, know that, they're just looking at one possible future, one possible timeline, one possible reality that's to them what seems the most obvious as well.
Something broken down by Bashar is that if you are crisis focused, then you will most likely be put in an experience where you are having a crisis outcome.
For sure.
Whether it be a tsunami, a hurricane, a terrorist plot, atomic warfare, whatever have you.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of possible outcomes that can occur today. And if you are crisis focused, then that is likely your outcome.
Yeah.
This, on the same note, if you are kind of just floating through life and you listen to the news and believe everything that you hear and not necessarily crisis focused, but you start to take it in as like accept it as true, then what you are doing is accepting that reality as a fact. So I think it's important that we take note of what we're paying attention to, what we're regarding as true, and where we're at vibrationally with any kind of outcome such as those. So when the thing he was talking about is like being able to shift yourself from one reality to the next, and just like I was talking about, teleportation from one room to a next, and then changing the mirror, not the mirror, but the picture on the wall with my vibration by moving my hand over it. It's really the same kind of thing that works as far as your own reality and the timeline that you're at. So if you find yourself having lots of different experiences and the world just seems to be at odds with you, then really start to look at yourself and why it is that you're you're experiencing those things. So did the person that you were talking to, did the other person really change because she changed?
Oh, right.
Or did she go to a new reality where it's actually a different person? It's a different version of the same person.
Well, I think that for myself, like in my family, I think I've transferred to a new reality because my husband is a completely different person. And I've done a lot of work to make this happen.
Yeah.
And so too is he. But it is interesting, did we change? Did we shift each other, or did we shift into a space where it's more coherent, more conducive to team play and team dynamics? It's hard to say unless you're
I know
looking.
what Bashar would say.
Right, exactly.
He would say you're shifting locations because you're shifting your vibration. So you're really not changing anything else but you.
Yeah.
But that's changing everything else around you because you're in a new place.
Yeah. I love that.
Me too.
I love that. So to me, the idea of time, it's very empowering. I don't feel limited. And although sometimes it's really slow, like this detoxing thing with sugar is really slow.
Yeah. That's just because you...
I don't want to hear I don't know what you're talking about.
You already know what I was going to say. Anyways.
I do. Anyway. Well,
how about we focus on the feeling of the outcome?
Oh,
the
God.
feeling of the
feeling
outcome.
of not wanting sugar. I've been doing a lot of that, actually.
No, not the feeling of not wanting sugar.
No,
the
I've been feeling
of
of
outcome.
I've been focusing on the feeling of my body feeling awesome, not having any inflammation at all, and not having any infection at all, and just focusing on being in that space. That's where I'm focusing. Is that what you're talking about? You're going to give me more instruction.
No, I'm more focused. When we're talking about the focus of the outcome, where your body feels free and light, right. And you're healthy and vibrant and in a new place energetically that you didn't know was possible, and life is flowing seamlessly for you, both mentally, emotionally, and health-wise. The outcome, the overall outcome.
Yeah, that's what I'm focusing on. See, we have to do it for ourselves, people. We walk the talk.
It's always harder with yourself, though.
So hard.
Wait. What am I doing? Okay, rewind.
Ignore the fact that there's chocolate chips in the kitchen. Ignore that. They're so yummy. They're not. They're not in the kitchen.
So much easier to tell somebody else to ignore it, huh?
Oh, I know. Brandon's not detoxing.
You outed me. What? Hey, to my credit, I just got back from the coast, and so it's much harder to do it there than at home.
Yes, I know, and I just got back too from a vacation too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
that's why I waited until I got home to start it.
All right. So I just got home.
Okay, good.
All right.
I plan on having company in this misery wagon.
They say it loves company.
It does. It really does. It really does. Makes me feel better already. All right. Well, that pretty much wraps up our discussion about time.
Yeah.
And, we've really enjoyed talking with us about you, and we'd love to hear any questions that you have. I'm going to let Brandon wrap up the show.
Well, yeah, thank you for listening. And again, to another Crystal Cocoon episode. If you want to find other episodes, we're on YouTube, of course, and wherever you found us, I don't know, or iTunes or Lisbon.
Dude, you're stinking at this.
I know.
All right, fine. I'm going to redo it. Thank you for listening to us at The Crystal Cocoon. You can find us on YouTube, iTunes, or Libsyn. You can also find us on Facebook, and we have a Twitter that's _CrystalCocoon. And gmail.com, CrystalCocoon at TheCrystalCocoon@gmail.com. You can email us questions, or you can join the discussion group also on Facebook. All right. Thank you for listening. We'll see you guys.